On his wedding day, his 8-year-old daughter pointed to the chapel gate and whispered just 2 words that changed everything. When he followed her gaze, he saw his bride in another man's arms. At that moment, he had no idea he was about to uncover the most shocking truth of his life. The white satin of Sarah's dress caught the morning light streaming through the chapel's stained glass windows, but Michael Thompson's hands were trembling for all the wrong reasons. His 8-year-old daughter Emma tugged at his black suit jacket, her voice cutting through the hushed reverence like a knife through silk. "Daddy? It's her." The words hit him like a physical blow, and when he followed Emma's pointing finger toward the side gate of the charming countryside chapel, his world tilted sideways. There was Sarah, his bride-to-be, wrapped in an embrace with a tall stranger that spoke of intimacy, of secrets, of everything he'd convinced himself didn't exist. Michael's chest tightened. 2 years of meticulous wedding preparations, 2 years of building a life with this woman who'd walked into his accounting office in Cedar Falls with tears in her eyes and a story about starting over. 2 years of believing he could give Emma the mother she'd lost to cancer when she was only 4. 2 years of convincing himself that the small inconsistencies in Sarah's stories were just the natural gaps that came with painful memories. But Emma saw everything. Children always did. The chapel bells chimed 9 o'clock, and Sarah broke away from the stranger, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Michael watched her walk toward the main entrance, her face transforming into the radiant smile he'd fallen in love with. The same smile that now felt like a performance, a mask carefully constructed to hide whatever truth lived beneath. "She looked scared, Daddy," Emma whispered, her small hand finding his. "Like Mommy used to look when she thought I wasn't watching." The comparison to his late wife, Elizabeth, hit Michael like a sucker punch. Elizabeth had carried secrets too, but hers had been about protecting others, about the volunteer work she'd never quite explained, about the late-night phone calls she'd take in the garden where she thought he couldn't hear. He'd respected her privacy then, trusted in the love they shared. But this felt different. This felt like betrayal wearing a wedding dress. The processional music began, and Michael forced his feet to move toward the altar. Reverend Martinez smiled at him, the same man who'd married him and Elizabeth 12 years ago in this very chapel. The same man who'd delivered Elizabeth's eulogy 4 years later. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was standing here again, in the shadow of one marriage's end, hoping for another's beginning. Sarah appeared at the chapel's entrance, and Michael's breath caught despite everything. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, green eyes that had seemed so sincere during their courtship, a smile that had made Emma giggle with delight. But now, watching her walk down the aisle on her father's arm, Michael catalogued every detail with the same methodical precision he brought to balance sheets. Her hands were trembling more than nerves should account for. Her eyes darted to the windows, as if checking for escape routes. The elegant woman beside her, Victoria Hayes, the maid of honor who'd been introduced as Sarah's childhood friend, whispered something that made Sarah's already pale complexion go chalky white. Michael had always prided himself on his attention to detail. It's what made him successful as a CPA, what had earned him the trust of half the businesses in Cedar Falls. Numbers didn't lie, people did. And right now, every number in this equation was coming up wrong. Emma stood beside him in her pale pink dress, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. She looked up at him with those wise brown eyes so much like her mother's and whispered, "Are you sure about this, Daddy?" The question hung in the air like incense. Was he sure? 3 months ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. Sarah had been patient with Emma, kind in a way that felt genuine. She'd helped with homework, braided hair for school, read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters. She'd made their house feel like a home again after years of quiet grief. But children saw truth differently than adults. They hadn't learned to rationalize away inconvenient observations or explain away gut feelings. Emma had always been intuitive, even as a toddler. She'd known her mother was sick before the doctors found the cancer. She'd known when neighborhood Mrs. Peterson was getting divorced before the moving trucks arrived, and she'd been asking questions about Sarah for weeks. Why does she cry at night, Daddy? Why does she jump when the phone rings? Why does she hide letters in the cookie jar? Michael had dismissed these observations as a child's imagination, as the natural wariness of a little girl who'd already lost one mother. But standing here now, watching Sarah avoid his eyes during the vows. He wondered if Emma had been trying to warn him all along. The ceremony proceeded with agonizing slowness. Sarah's voice cracked during her vows, and she kept glancing toward Victoria, who nodded encouragingly like a coach prompting an actress. When it came time for the rings, Victoria's hands shook as she passed over Sarah's wedding band, and Michael noticed the thin, tan line on Victoria's own ring finger, as if she'd recently removed her own wedding ring. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Martinez announced, and Michael leaned in to kiss Sarah. Her lips were cold, and she pulled away too quickly, her eyes already scanning the crowd of guests as if looking for someone who shouldn't be there. The reception was held in the community hall, decorated with locally grown sunflowers and baby's breath. Sarah had insisted on keeping everything simple, local, she'd said. Now Michael wondered if it had more to do with staying under some kind of radar. The guests were mostly his friends and colleagues, his extended family from across Iowa. Sarah's side was sparse, just Victoria and a handful of people she'd claimed were distant cousins. Michael watched Sarah during the reception with new eyes. She barely ate, drank only water, and kept checking her phone with an urgency that had nothing to do with wedding day excitement. Victoria stayed close, too close, managing every interaction like a security detail. When old Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop tried to ask Sarah about her family, Victoria smoothly redirected the conversation. Emma spent the evening charming the guests as she always did, but Michael noticed she kept gravitating back to Sarah, offering small kindnesses. A napkin when Sarah spilled punch on her dress. A flower from her bouquet when Sarah's smile looked forced. His daughter was trying to comfort his new wife, and the sight twisted something deep in his chest. During the father-daughter dance, Emma looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. "She's not really happy, is she?" "What makes you say that?" "She smiles with her mouth but not her eyes, like when you smile at people who make you sad, but you have to be polite." Michael spun his daughter slowly, processing her observation. When had Emma become so perceptive about adult emotions? When had she learned to see through the facades that he, with all his adult experience, had missed? As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Michael found himself studying the wedding photos the photographer showed him. In every single picture, Sarah's gaze was directed somewhere off-camera, as if she was watching for someone or something. Victoria appeared in the background of almost every shot, positioned like a sentinel. The last guests departed around midnight, and Michael, Sarah, and Emma drove home to the house on Maple Street that would now be their shared sanctuary. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's excitement, but Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the dark Iowa countryside. It was a beautiful ceremony, Michael offered, hoping to bridge whatever chasm had opened between them. "Yes," Sarah replied, but her voice was distant. "Beautiful." She didn't sound like a woman who'd just married the man she loved. She sounded like someone going through the motions of a performance that was finally over. That night, after Emma was tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Michael lay awake listening to Sarah cry softly beside him. Not tears of joy, not the emotional release of a perfect day, but quiet, desperate sobbing that she tried to muffle in her pillow. When he reached for her, she stiffened and whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm just tired." But Michael knew the sound of grief, and this wasn't tiredness. This was fear. The next morning brought the mundane reality of married life. Michael made coffee while Sarah showered, and Emma chatted about the wedding cake and how pretty Victoria had looked. Normal family sounds that should have felt like victory, but instead felt like a fragile pretense that could shatter at any moment. Sarah came downstairs dressed in jeans and a sweater, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked younger without the wedding's glamour, and more vulnerable. She kissed Emma's forehead and accepted the coffee Michael offered, but her hands shook as she lifted the mug to her lips. "Victoria called," she said without looking at either of them. "She wants to stop by later to return some things from yesterday." "Of course," Michael replied, though something about the way Sarah said it felt rehearsed. Victoria arrived that afternoon carrying a small overnight bag and wearing the expression of someone with urgent business. She kissed Sarah on both cheeks, European style, and handed Emma a small wrapped present. "For being such a wonderful flower girl," Victoria said, her smile genuine for the first time Michael had seen. Emma tore open the package to reveal a delicate silver locket, "It's beautiful, thank you." "It belonged to my daughter," Victoria said, and something flickered across her face, too quick for Michael to interpret. While Emma ran upstairs to show her new treasure to her dolls, Victoria and Sarah spoke in low voices in the kitchen. Michael pretended to read the Sunday paper in the living room, but he couldn't help overhearing fragments of their conversation. Our timeline has changed. Victoria's voice was tense. "Can't keep doing this." Sarah's voice was pleading. "Safer if you stick to the plan." "But Emma, she's getting attached." Michael's blood ran cold. Plan? What plan involved his daughter's emotions as a factor to be managed? When Victoria left an hour later, she hugged Sarah tightly and whispered something that made Sarah nod reluctantly. Michael watched through the living room window as Victoria got into her car, but instead of driving away immediately, she sat for several minutes making what appeared to be urgent phone calls. That evening, as Michael helped Emma with her homework at the kitchen table, he noticed Sarah going through the mail with unusual intensity. She separated certain envelopes from the pile, letters that didn't have their address printed on them, but rather appeared to be hand-delivered. She took these upstairs, and Michael heard the sound of paper being torn up in the bathroom. Emma looked up from her math problems. "Why does Sarah get secret letters?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She gets them every few days. Victoria brings some of them. Sarah always throws them away after reading them, but she keeps the pieces in different trash cans so nobody can put them back together." Michael's investigative instincts, honed by years of forensic accounting, began to activate. "How long has this been going on?" "Since before the wedding. Maybe 2 months?" Emma chewed on her pencil, considering. "I thought maybe they were planning a surprise for you, but you don't look surprised. You look worried." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed early claiming a headache, Michael found himself standing in his home office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of organized files and balanced books. Everything in his professional life made sense, followed logical patterns, could be traced from source to conclusion. But his personal life had become a maze of variables that didn't add up to any reasonable equation. He pulled out the folder where he kept copies of Sarah's identification documents from their marriage license application. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, born in Denver, Colorado. Divorced, no children. Social security number, driver's license, birth certificate, all present and accounted for. He'd been impressed by how organized she was, how she'd had all her paperwork ready when they'd gone to the courthouse. Now, looking at the documents with fresh eyes, something nagged at him. The paper quality was slightly different from what he was used to seeing in official documents. The fonts weren't quite right. Details that his trained eye should have caught months ago, but had been overlooked because he'd wanted to believe in their love story. Michael locked the folder back in his filing cabinet and headed upstairs. Sarah was already asleep, or pretending to be, curled on her side, facing away from him. In the dim light from the hallway, he could see her shoulders shaking slightly, as if she was crying silently into her pillow. He thought about Emma's question from earlier. Why did Sarah get secret letters? Why did Victoria manage every aspect of their social interactions? Why did Sarah jump every time the phone rang, every time someone knocked on the door, every time a car pulled into their driveway? And most disturbing of all, why did his daughter seem to understand that something was wrong while he, the adult, had been blind to it for months? As Michael finally drifted off to sleep, Emma's voice echoed in his memory. "Daddy, it's her." But now he wondered if his daughter hadn't been identifying Sarah at all. Maybe she'd been warning him about something else entirely, something he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start looking for answers. Not as a man in love, but as an accountant who knew that when the books didn't balance, someone was hiding the truth. And in his experience, the truth always came with a price that somebody had to pay. The question was, who was paying it, and what would it cost his family when the bill finally came due? Monday morning arrived with the crisp October air that meant winter was coming to Iowa, but Michael Thompson barely noticed the changing season. He sat in his office at Thompson & Associates CPA, staring at his computer screen, where Sarah's bank statements glowed like evidence in a criminal case. 3 months of marriage, and he was already conducting forensic analysis on his own wife's finances. The numbers told a story that made his stomach churn. Regular transfers to an account he'd never seen before. $500 every 2 weeks, like clockwork. Always on Tuesdays. Always to an account registered under a name he didn't recognize. Hayes Financial Services. Hayes, as in Victoria Hayes. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. 23 years as an accountant had taught him that money trails never lied. People lied. Documents could be forged. But money always told the truth about what people valued, where their loyalties lay, what they were trying to hide. His office phone rang, startling him out of his analysis. Thompson and Associates. Michael? Sarah's voice sounded small, uncertain. I was wondering, could you come home for lunch today? Emma's school called. She's not feeling well. Michael's parental instincts immediately overrode his suspicions. What's wrong? Should I call Dr. Peterson? No, nothing serious. She says her stomach hurts. The nurse thinks she might be coming down with something. But when Michael arrived home 30 minutes later, he found Emma sitting at the kitchen table, coloring, looking perfectly healthy. She glanced up at him with those perceptive brown eyes and whispered, I'm not really sick, Daddy. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, but her car was in the driveway. Michael knelt beside his daughter's chair. Then why did the school call me? Emma looked toward the living room, then back at her coloring book. Sarah asked me to pretend my tummy hurt so you'd come home. She said she needed to talk to someone important and didn't want to be alone. Michael's blood pressure spiked. Where is Sarah now, sweetheart? Upstairs, talking on the phone. She's crying again. Michael climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his accountant's mind cataloging every detail. Sarah's voice carried through the closed bedroom door, hushed but urgent. I can't keep doing this to them, Victoria. Emma knows something's wrong. She's too smart, too sensitive. And Michael... God, Michael's starting to ask questions. Michael pressed his ear to the door, his heart hammering. No, I won't consider that option. I won't run again. This little girl has already lost one mother. I won't destroy her trust in people. A pause. Then Sarah's voice, smaller now. What do you mean the timeline's moved up? How much time do we have? Michael backed away from the door as if it had burned him. Timeline? Run again? What the hell had he married? He found Emma in the kitchen, still coloring but now drawing what looked like their house surrounded by storm clouds. Emma, honey, has Sarah ever talked to you about going away somewhere? Emma nodded without looking up from her drawing. She asked me if I liked traveling, and if I thought you would like to live somewhere else, maybe somewhere warmer. I told her we like it here because Mommy is buried here. The innocent honesty of his daughter's response hit Michael like a physical blow. Sarah was planning to take them away from Elizabeth's grave, away from the life they'd built, away from everything Emma had left of her biological mother. What did Sarah say when you told her that? She cried. She cries a lot, Daddy. Sometimes I pretend to have bad dreams so I can go sleep with you both, and she's always awake, staring at the ceiling. Michael sank into the chair beside his daughter, overwhelmed by the realization that Emma had been protecting him, gathering intelligence about their family dynamics with the natural cunning of a child who'd learned early that adults weren't always honest. That afternoon, after driving Emma back to school with reassurances that she was feeling better, Michael made a decision that went against every fiber of his trusting nature. He drove to the Cedar Falls Public Library and used one of their computers to search for information about Victoria Hayes. What he found made his hands shake so violently he had to grip the sides of the keyboard. Victoria Hayes wasn't just a financial consultant. She ran a network that specialized in creating new identities for women fleeing dangerous situations. Her website, buried deep in search results and written in careful legal language, offered life transition services and personal security consultations. The testimonials were vague but telling. Victoria saved my life. I finally feel safe thanks to her expertise. My children and I have a future now. Michael's investigative instincts kicked into overdrive. If Sarah was running from something dangerous, if she genuinely needed protection, then his growing suspicions made him the villain in this story. But if she was scamming him, using his grief and loneliness to access his stable life and his daughter's trust, then his family was in danger from an entirely different threat. He drove home that evening with more questions than answers, but as he pulled into his driveway, he noticed something that stopped his heart cold. There was a black sedan parked across the street, and the man behind the wheel was taking pictures of his house. Michael sat in his car for a full minute, watching the stranger through his rearview mirror. The man appeared to be in his 40s, well-dressed with the kind of focused attention that screamed professional surveillance. When the man noticed Michael watching, he started his engine and drove away, but not before Michael caught his license plate number. Inside the house, Sarah was helping Emma with her homework, looking for all the world like the loving stepmother he'd thought he was marrying. But now he noticed the way she kept glancing toward the windows, the way she startled when Emma dropped her pencil, the way her hands never seemed to stop trembling. "How was your day?" she asked, her smile bright and brittle. "Fine," Michael lied, settling into his usual chair at the kitchen table. "How about yours? Feeling better after lunch?" Something flickered across Sarah's face, too quick to interpret. "Yes, much better. Thank you for coming home." That night, after Emma was asleep and Sarah was in the shower, Michael did something that would have horrified him 3 months earlier. He searched through Sarah's purse. Hidden in a zippered compartment, he found a cell phone he'd never seen before. When he powered it on, it was filled with text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, all using what appeared to be some kind of code. "The roses need water on Tuesday. Uncle Jim is asking about Thanksgiving plans. The recipe you wanted is ready for pickup." None of it made sense in the context of a normal life, but it made perfect sense if Sarah was communicating with people who needed to stay hidden, people who spoke in code to avoid detection. Michael photographed several of the messages with his own phone before powering down Sarah's secret device and returning it to her purse. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the zipper. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Michael was in his office when his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Thompson, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's about your wife. He doesn't have an appointment, but he seems urgent." The man who entered Michael's office was the same one who'd been photographing his house the night before. He was tall, expensively dressed, with cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Michael's office. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Detective James Morrison, private investigator." He handed over a business card that looked legitimate. "I'm working a case that involves your wife, and I need to ask you some questions." Michael's mouth went dry. "What kind of case?" "Your wife isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Sarah Blackwood, and she's wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of several valuable items from her previous residence. Items belonging to her former husband." The room spun slightly. "Former husband, she's divorced." Morrison shook his head. "Not legally, sir. Richard Blackwood is still very much married to your wife, and he's been looking for her for over 2 years. She disappeared one night with some family heirlooms and a considerable amount of cash." Michael gripped the edge of his desk. "That's impossible. I've seen her divorce papers. Forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." Morrison opened a briefcase and spread several photographs across Michael's desk. "This is Sarah Blackwood, taken 2.5 years ago at a charity gala with her husband. The woman in the photographs was unmistakably Sarah, but she looked different, harder. Her smile was calculating rather than vulnerable, and she wore jewelry that would have cost more than Michael's annual salary. Mr. Blackwood is a prominent businessman," Morrison continued. "Import-export operations across several states. He's been very patient in his search for his wife, hoping she would come to her senses and return home. But patience has limits." Michael stared at the photographs, his world tilting sideways for the second time in a week. What does he want? To start, he wants his wife back. The belongings she took are secondary to that goal. Mr. Blackwood is devoted to his marriage. Something in Morrison's tone made Michael's skin crawl. "And if she doesn't want to go back?" Morrison's smile was thin and cold. "Mr. Blackwood can be very persuasive. He's a man who gets what he wants, Mr. Thompson. I'd suggest you don't get in his way." After Morrison left, Michael sat in his office for 2 hours, staring at the business card. The ethical thing would be to confront Sarah immediately, to demand the truth about her identity, her past, her reasons for entering his life. But something about Morrison's visit felt wrong, like a threat disguised as information. Michael thought about Emma's observations, about Sarah's tears, about the way she jumped at unexpected sounds. If she was running from an abusive marriage, if Richard Blackwood was the kind of man who hired investigators to track down a wife who'd left him, then Sarah might be the victim in this scenario. But if she was a thief and a bigamist who was using him and Emma as cover for her crimes, then every day she stayed in their house put his daughter at risk. That evening, Michael made a decision that surprised him. Instead of confronting Sarah, he decided to test her. "I had an interesting visitor today," he said over dinner, watching Sarah's face carefully. "A man asking questions about identity theft. Apparently, there's been a rash of cases where people assume false identities to escape debt or criminal charges." Sarah went very still, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, just general awareness stuff. How to spot forged documents, warning signs of someone living under an assumed name. You know, the usual precautions for a small business owner." Sarah nodded, but Michael noticed she didn't take another bite of food. That's smart. You can never be too careful." Emma, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered about her day at school. "Mrs. Henderson said we're going to study family trees next week. She wants us to bring in pictures of our relatives. Can I bring pictures of Mommy?" "Of course, sweetheart," Michael said, but he was watching Sarah, who had gone pale. "What about you, Sarah?" Emma asked innocently. "Do you have pictures of your family we could include?" Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. My family photos were lost in a fire before I moved here." Another lie, smooth and practiced. Michael made a mental note to check for any record of fires in Denver around the time Sarah claimed to have lived there. That night, Michael waited until Sarah was asleep before quietly accessing her secret phone again. This time, he copied down every contact, every message, every piece of information that might help him understand who his wife really was. One message received that afternoon while he'd been meeting with Morrison made his blood run cold. "Package is ready for pickup. Tuesday night as planned. Bring the small package with you." Small package. Emma was small. Emma was a package that could be taken somewhere. Michael's hands shook as he returned the phone to Sarah's purse. He had less than 48 hours to figure out if his wife was planning to kidnap his daughter, or if she was trying to protect both of them from a danger he couldn't yet comprehend. Either way, Tuesday night was going to change everything. He looked in on Emma, sleeping peacefully in her room surrounded by stuffed animals and the drawings she'd made of their family. In every picture, she'd drawn Sarah with tears on her face, but she'd also drawn herself holding Sarah's hand, as if trying to comfort her. Even if Sarah was a criminal, even if she'd lied about everything else, Emma had seen something in her that deserved protection. The question was whether Michael's duty as a father required him to expose Sarah's secrets or to help her keep them. By Tuesday night, he would have his answer, and depending on what he discovered, either his family would finally be safe, or everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and protection would be destroyed forever. The clock on Emma's nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m., and Michael realized that in less than 20 hours, he would know if the woman sleeping in his bed was his salvation or his family's destruction. Tuesday arrived like a death sentence. Michael spent the day at his office, unable to concentrate on anything but the clock on his wall and the weight of the decisions he'd have to make in the next few hours. Every client consultation felt surreal, every phone call an interruption to the mental chess game he was playing with possibilities and consequences. At 3 o'clock, his secretary knocked on his door. "Mr. Thompson, your daughter's school called. Emma's asking to be picked up early. She says she doesn't feel well again." Michael's heart lurched. Not today. Not when everything was about to explode. Did they say what's wrong? The nurse thinks it might be anxiety. Emma told her she had a bad feeling about something happening at home. Children and their intuition. Michael grabbed his keys, knowing that Emma's bad feeling was probably more accurate than any adult analysis of their situation. He found Emma sitting in the nurse's office, clutching her small backpack and looking pale. When she saw him, she ran into his arms with unusual urgency. "Daddy, we need to go home right now. Sarah's in trouble." Michael knelt to Emma's eye level. "What kind of trouble, sweetheart?" "I don't know exactly, but this morning she kept looking out the windows and checking the locks on the doors, and she packed a bag. Not like a regular trip bag, like a running away bag." The drive home took exactly 12 minutes, but felt like hours. Michael's mind raced through scenarios. If Sarah was planning to run with Emma tonight, he could call the police now, have her arrested for attempted kidnapping. If she was planning to run without Emma, then maybe she was trying to draw danger away from his daughter. If she wasn't planning to run at all, then he was about to destroy an innocent woman based on suspicion and fear. The house looked normal from the outside. Sarah's car was in the driveway. The curtains were open, nothing seemed amiss. But when they walked inside, Michael immediately noticed the subtle signs that Emma had been trained by circumstances to recognize. The family photos on the mantel had been turned face down. The spare house key was missing from its hook by the kitchen door. Sarah's reading glasses, which she never went anywhere without, were sitting on the counter as if abandoned. "Sarah," Michael called out. "In here," her voice came from the living room, but it sounded hollow, defeated. They found her sitting on the couch, staring at a pile of documents spread across the coffee table. When she looked up at them, her face was streaked with tears and filled with a resignation that made Michael's chest tighten. "I need to tell you both the truth," she said quietly, "before someone else does, before it's too late to explain." Emma immediately went to Sarah and climbed onto the couch beside her, taking Sarah's hand in both of her small ones. "Are you the one who's in trouble?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. "Yes, baby. I'm the one in trouble." Michael remained standing, his accountant's mind automatically cataloging the documents on the coffee table. Marriage certificates, birth certificates, medical records, bank statements, some bearing Sarah's name, others with names he didn't recognize. "My real name is Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood," she began, her voice steady despite the tears. "I've been married to Richard Blackwood for 7 years. And for the last 3 of those years, I've been trying to find a way to leave him without ending up dead." The words hit Michael like physical blows. Dead? Richard is charming, successful, wealthy. To the outside world, he's the perfect husband. But behind closed doors, he's a monster who believes that wives are property, that disobedience should be punished, that leaving him would be the ultimate betrayal deserving of the ultimate consequence. Sarah's grip on Emma's hand tightened. 2.5 years ago, I finally worked up the courage to try to leave. I took some jewelry, family heirlooms that had belonged to my grandmother, things that Richard claimed as his when we married but that were legally mine. I took enough money to survive for a few months and I ran. Michael sank into the chair across from them, his world rearranging itself around this new information. Victoria Hayes? Victoria runs a network that helps women like me disappear. She creates new identities, establishes new lives, provides protection during the transition. But Richard has resources, private investigators, connections in law enforcement, the kind of money that makes people willing to look the other way. Emma's voice was small but fierce. "He's the bad man you've been hiding from." Sarah nodded, pressing a kiss to the top of Emma's head. "The bad man found me 3 months ago. Victoria said the only way to stay safe was to become so deeply embedded in a normal life that it would be too complicated for Richard to extract me without drawing attention. A marriage, a stepchild, a community that knew me, it would make me harder to disappear quietly. The mercenary calculation behind their courtship and marriage should have enraged Michael, but instead he found himself understanding the desperate logic of a trapped woman. "So you targeted me?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "At first, Victoria identified you as an ideal candidate. Widowed, stable, lonely enough to fall in love quickly, but established enough in the community to provide protection. A ready-made family that would give me legitimacy." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "And Emma? Was she just a convenient prop in your escape plan?" Sarah's face crumpled. "That's what makes this so impossible. I did target you, Michael. I did manipulate our meeting, our courtship, our marriage." "But Emma..." She looked down at his daughter, who was watching both adults with that wise, too-old expression. "Emma changed everything. The first time she called me Mom Sarah, the first time she crawled into my lap with a nightmare, the first time she told me she loved me. I realized I couldn't keep using her. I couldn't keep using either of you." Emma spoke up with the clarity that children sometimes possessed in emotional crises. "But you didn't stop loving us just because you started loving us for real reasons instead of fake reasons, right?" The question hung in the air like absolution and condemnation rolled into one. Sarah's tears came harder now. "No, baby. I didn't stop loving you, that's the problem. I was supposed to use you to stay safe, but instead you made me want to be safe. For real, forever." A car door slammed outside, and all 3 of them froze. Sarah's face went white as sheet. "He's here," she whispered. Michael moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The black sedan from Monday was parked in his driveway, and Morrison was walking toward the front door with a confidence that spoke of backup and authority. "Emma," Go to your room and lock the door, Michael said quietly. No. Emma's voice was firm. We stay together. That's what families do. Before anyone could argue, the doorbell rang. Then knocked. Then Morrison's voice carried through the door. Mrs. Blackwood, we know you're in there. Mr. Blackwood just wants to talk. Sarah stood on shaking legs. Richard's here. Michael looked out the window again and saw a second car, this one a silver Mercedes. A man in an expensive suit was getting out, tall and imposing with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came with money and power. Is there a back way out? Michael asked. Sarah shook her head. Victoria was supposed to have an extraction plan ready for tonight, but Richard moved faster than we expected. I think someone in the network was compromised. The knocking became pounding. Sarah Elizabeth, you've caused enough trouble. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized adults. Even through the door, Richard Blackwood's voice carried an undercurrent of controlled violence that made Michael's skin crawl. This was not a man who would be satisfied with just getting his wife back. This was a man who would punish everyone who had helped her resist him. Emma tugged on Michael's shirt. Daddy, I have an idea, but you have to trust me. Sweetheart, this isn't a game. I know it's not a game, but I know something they don't know. Emma's eyes were bright with the kind of cunning that reminded Michael uncomfortably of her mother. Sarah, do you trust me? Sarah knelt beside Emma, cupping her face in both hands. With my life. Good. Daddy, call 911, but don't tell them what's really happening. Tell them there are strange men trying to break into our house, and you're scared they're going to hurt your family. Make it sound like a home invasion. Michael stared at his 8-year-old daughter, amazed by her tactical thinking. Emma, that's brilliant. The pounding on the door intensified and Morrison's voice carried a new edge. We're going to count to 10, and then we're coming in. One more thing, Emma said, pulling out her phone. When had she gotten old enough for a phone? And starting to record. Sarah, I need you to tell the truth about what Richard did to you. Loud enough for them to hear outside. If they think no one is listening, bad people always tell the truth. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood Emma's plan. She moved closer to the front door and raised her voice. Richard, I left you because you broke my ribs when I burned dinner. Because you locked me in the basement for 3 days when I talked to my sister without permission. Because you told me that if I ever tried to leave, you would kill me and anyone who helped me. The pounding stopped abruptly, as if Richard hadn't expected his dirty laundry to be aired quite so publicly. Michael was on the phone with 911, describing intruders threatening his family, when he heard Richard's voice change tactics. Sarah, darling, you're obviously distressed. These people have been filling your head with paranoid fantasies. Come home and we'll get you the help you need. The help I need? Sarah's voice grew stronger, fed by righteous anger. You mean like the help when you convinced my doctor to prescribe sedatives so I'd be easier to control? Or the help when you told my family I was mentally unstable so they'd stop taking my calls? Emma continued recording, her small face set with determination. Michael realized his daughter was creating evidence that could protect Sarah permanently, but only if they all survived the next few minutes. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Richard's voice outside became urgent. Morrison, we need to end this now. Sir, there are police coming. We should retreat and regroup. No, she's made me look like a fool for too long, and now she's involved these people, contaminated them with her lies. They all need to understand what happens when you interfere with my marriage. Michael heard the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen and realized they were out of time. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the front door and positioned himself between his family and the sound of footsteps in his house. Stay behind me, he whispered to Sarah and Emma. But Emma had one more surprise. She pressed a button on her phone, and suddenly her recording of Sarah's testimony began playing at full volume, filling the house with Sarah's accusations of abuse, Richard's manipulative responses, and the sound of men breaking into a family home. The kitchen door swung open and Morrison appeared, but he stopped short when he realized everything was being broadcast and recorded. Behind him, Richard Blackwood looked exactly like the kind of man who was used to getting his way through intimidation and violence, until he saw the phone in Emma's hand. You clever little bitch, Richard snarled, lunging toward Emma. He never made it. Michael's baseball bat caught him across the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Sarah grabbed a kitchen knife and put herself between Richard and Emma. And Emma kept recording, catching every threat, every admission, every moment of violence that proved exactly what kind of man Richard Blackwood really was. The police sirens were on the street now, and red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Richard looked around wildly, realizing he was trapped in a situation that couldn't be explained away or covered up. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes, it is," Emma said, still recording. "Because now everyone knows what you really are." The next hour was a blur of police questions, EMT checks, and statements given while sitting in Michael's living room, surrounded by the debris of their normal life. Richard and Morrison were arrested, though Michael suspected Richard's lawyers would have him out on bail within hours. But Emma's recording changed everything. In her innocent wisdom, she had created undeniable evidence of threats, breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping, and admission of prior domestic abuse. The video was already uploaded to the cloud, already shared with Victoria's network, already beyond Richard's ability to suppress or destroy. Detective Riley, the lead officer on the case, explained to Michael that Richard Blackwood had been under federal investigation for months related to his import business, but authorities had been unable to build a case. Sarah's testimony, combined with Emma's evidence, would likely provide the leverage needed to bring him down permanently. "Your daughter is incredibly brave," Detective Riley told Michael, "and remarkably smart. She might have just saved a lot of lives tonight." After the police left, the three of them sat in their damaged kitchen, processing what had happened and what came next. "I'll understand if you want me to leave," Sarah said quietly. "I brought danger into your home, into Emma's life. I lied about everything." "You didn't lie about loving us," Emma said firmly. "And we didn't lie about loving you." Michael looked at his daughter, then at his wife, and realized that love built on deception could still become real if the people involved were willing to fight for the truth. "No one's leaving," he said, "but no more secrets, no more lies, no more hidden phones or mysterious letters. If we're going to be a family, we need to trust each other completely." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria's network will help with witness protection if needed, new identities if Richard's conviction doesn't stick. But I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay here, with both of you, and build something real." Emma crawled into Sarah's lap, then reached for Michael's hand, creating a chain of connection between all three of them. "We're already something real," Emma said with the wisdom of a child who had learned too young that families weren't always defined by blood or law, but by the willingness to protect each other when everything fell apart. 6 months later, Richard Blackwood was serving a 15-year federal sentence for racketeering, money laundering, and domestic terrorism. Victoria's network had been legitimized through cooperation with federal authorities, providing legal protection services for abuse victims nationwide. Sarah had legally changed her name back to Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, and Emma had started calling her just Mom, without any qualifiers. They still lived in the same house on Maple Street, but they'd replaced the broken windows and installed a security system that made Emma feel safer. Michael had learned to trust his instincts about people, and Sarah had learned that being loved didn't require her to be perfect or to hide her past. Every Tuesday night, they had family dinner and shared one truth about themselves that they'd never told anyone else. It had become their tradition, their way of ensuring that secrets never again had the power to destroy what they'd built together. The truth, Michael had learned, wasn't always comfortable, but it was the only foundation strong enough to build a real family on, and the only weapon powerful enough to defeat the monsters who preferred to operate in darkness. Emma kept the silver locket Victoria had given her, but now it held a picture of all three of them together, Michael, Sarah, and Emma, looking like exactly what they were, a family that had survived the worst and chosen to love each other anyway. And every morning when Michael woke up next to Sarah, when Emma climbed into their bed for cuddles before school, when they made breakfast together and fought over the comics section and lived the beautifully ordinary life they'd almost lost, he remembered that some truths were worth fighting for and some families were worth saving, no matter what lies had brought them together in the first place. The wedding pictures still sat on their mantle, but now they were joined by new photos: Emma's school concerts, family vacations, quiet Sunday mornings, images that told the story not of how their love began, but of how it had survived, grown stronger, and become the kind of truth that could never be destroyed by the past or threatened by those who preferred victims to remain silent. In the end, that was the most important truth of all.